yesterday's news, as well as the long-term ripple effects of the unfair and unjust trade war that our partners from the U.S. have started and continue to engage in. And so we greatly appreciate their time and energy. And with that said, I will open the floor to questions. I think seeing only Al and Matthew, just if you guys want to put your hands up and go accordingly, we can. I think we can probably keep this pretty informal unless required to go formal. So
I think you guys are about the last two journalists left in the city.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're both out in gray at the same rate I am, so it's
Yeah,
a little
a
disconcerting.
little faster,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Well, you guys don't visit the salon every 6 weeks. I just turned 54.
So could I ask, Matthew, do you mind if I ask a question first, or do you want to go first? Okay. Whoever wants to answer this. So we've heard about the layoffs at ArcelorMittal at the wire plant. Do you guys have any sense of whether there have been other layoffs because of the tariffs? What kind of scale we're looking for? Like how many people might be out of work right now because of what's going on with these tariffs?
I don't know, Al, if we have any numbers, but what we're hearing is that there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And so companies are not getting the orders that they would typically get, and they are having to scale back operations. So I think there's a lot of companies who, if they haven't laid people off yet, it could be coming imminently. So that leads to a lot of fear in the market and a lot of uncertainty. And it's something we certainly have to address at the federal level.
Okay.
And I'll just add that what we're hearing is that there are a lot of businesses that currently have U.S. contracts. They're finishing off those U.S. contracts, so they're still working, they're still producing based on the current work that they have, but they're not getting new contracts, especially in the United States. So there will be an impact, in the very near future.
Can you give us any sense of like when we would see that? But the steel companies just keep this information to themselves, understandably. But when would we see that? What kind of impact would we see here in the city? If
we had those answers, it would have a serious impact on the market. I don't think we could divulge it, even if we had that answer. I think that's that's what everyone wants to know, Al. We've put in this 30-day deadline to come up with a trade deal with the U.S. and it's urgent, I think is the point. It's urgent that we find a path where those tariffs go away.
And Lisa, are you able to? Sorry, folks. Are you able to sort of explain to a layperson the current mitigation measures for anti-dumping? Like, explain to me what we've just announced yesterday in terms of helping with dumping concerns.
I don't want to misspeak because it's technical. Let me get back to you with that information from the department straight ahead, unless JP wants to pipe in. I think we'll still have more to do on anti-dumping. I think the problem is we don't always identify the country of origin where the steel is actually produced and poured. If it could get turned away from the Canadian border because we're not importing from China. But then that same steel will go to Vietnam and be turned into cold pressed steel and then come back to Canada and be let in. It's the same product. It was still produced in China with heavily polluting coal producing industries. So I would say that we got some excellent ideas today in our meeting about how to further address that problem, because it's something that has been a problem in the industry since before the tariffs. So it would be a huge boon to the industry if we could really crack down on this steel that is being illegally imported into our country regularly.
Yeah, and I was going to say the reason why I was asking for that clarity is because when I talked to the the two major associations for steel producers and steel constructors, they seem based on their statements and comments sort of lukewarm on the measures, that they think it's not cracking down enough. So how do you are you hearing that in your meeting today?
We have some feedback on how we can be stronger in that response. Absolutely.
And I think we heard very clearly from the producers, from manufacturers, from the unions, that this is their number one issue where the federal government can have a direct impact. I think from the federal government's perspective, we're also balancing the overall Canadian economy, that any reaction that we take doesn't just impact the steel industry, it impacts the economy as a whole. But this has been a long-standing issue for years, successive governments, and it's the number one thing that we're hearing from industry stakeholders.
And that reminds me another good point that we heard today is that our response to the tariffs, the counter tariffs, can be equally damaging to local countries or companies. So we have to be very mindful in how we apply the counter tariffs, because there are companies that rely on products from the US. They can't source from anywhere else. And if they can't get those products, then they go out of business. So it's a delicate balance. There's definitely a downside to the counter tariffs here in Canada.
So how would you bring in counter tariffs without causing damage in Canada?
Without causing any damage, you have to be very careful. You have to be very surgical and precise. I think we managed that the last time we had to deal with tariffs in the mid 2015 2017 era, when we dealt with this the first time. I think we were able to, but there's always going to be some detrimental effect. The idea is to minimize the negative impact.
Who was in your meeting today?
Are we saying, Greg?
I can say, and so I'll do a double dip here, Matthew. The best way I've heard it explained to me is utilizing a passport, right? If I go to Australia, but I stop in Costa Rica for 6 months, that doesn't mean I'm now a Costa Rican citizen. I'm still Canadian at trade. So that steel that originates in China should have its Chinese passport throughout, and so that's the best way to track it, and that's the simplest way that it's been explained to me that I understand. We had leaders. We had representatives from our two partners here, as well from the city. We had from leading industry organizations, and both at the steel producing, but also throughout our manufacturing community. And then we also had leaders from organizations that support our steel and steel industry here in Hamilton. So we had voices on both at a local and national level, and from both not just steel, but the second kind of layer of impacts.
Like fabricators and
yes, sir. Yeah, you got
it. And so nobody who was comfortable being identified.
I think respectfully, we didn't ask, so I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and break the trust of any of our members. So I'll say that.
What's the mood of these guys, Greg? Can you say?
Yeah, I think so. We met with our manufacturing community in early March, and the runway that we were given, or kind of again that, and JP and Lisa already touched on it, that orders still needed to be fulfilled, and that there was a runway, and that the current levels of tariffs, at whether it was at holistic or 25%, I think that's been accelerated with the increase to the 50%. I think much graver concerns today than 3 months ago.
Do we get a sense in talking to those members and the people who participated today that, you know, we've basically given ourselves like a month-long deadline to see if we can negotiate a more reasonable trade environment. Do you get a sense that your members can hold on that long?
I think probably, again, I'm trying to pull from conversations we had today, is that everybody is looking for long-term clarity around what the economic landscape and what future trade with America is going to look like, whether that's, the continued, you know, looking for a continued commitment to shopping Canadian and shopping local, but also understanding what trade with our number one trade partners historically is going to look like going forward. And I think it's fair to say there's a significant sense of urgency to have that clarity.
Can I just throw this out there? What do you guys, or what do the steel producers, did they say anything about this? The decision by British Columbia Ferries to buy new ships from China, apparently because the steel is cheaper, instead of Canadian-made ships. Was any thoughts on that?
JP brought it up, actually. Go ahead, JP.
So this is covered with some of the provisions for the free trade agreements, buying from countries that we have reciprocal free trade agreements with. So that's a commitment that allows the federal government to buy Canadian in alignment with free trade agreements so that we're in compliance. And we're also extending that to the provinces. We can't mandate the provinces to do that. So the BC Ferries is a perfect example of a provincial decision that would be counter to the goals that we're trying to build in the One Canadian economy, the Buy Canadian provisions. But now we're giving those tools to the provinces and by extension municipalities to also do the same thing to make sure in their procurement that they are favoring Canadian products, Canadian producers, Canadian contractors, et cetera.
Was that kind of a kick in the teeth for the Canadian steel industry at this point?
I think considering everything that's going on, when you have a large infrastructure project, a large shipbuilding project, anything like that, that isn't focused on the Canadian economy, it raises issues with, the broader economic response. At the federal level, I'll say the good news is that Bill C5 is going to pass today. I assume, or the votes will be later this afternoon. The One Canadian Economy Act, and that puts in place all these provisions to expand, those Buy Canadian provisions. When the Prime Minister says that we're committed to building the strongest economy in the G7, that's not rhetoric. He really means that, and we're putting those building blocks in place, the foundation that we need to do that, and we're doing that right now.
Maybe the last question I'll ask is I know in talking to people last night, it didn't seem like there were a lot of really nitty-gritty details about some of the high-level announced commitments. Are those details sort of still under consideration, or should I expect like a backgrounder to be circulated at some point in the coming days, or?
You can ask us questions and we can answer them. It's sort of a broad question, so I'm not really sure how to answer you. We can get more details on it from the department directly, and we can put you in touch with people in the department who have those sorts of answers.
Sure. Yeah, I think there was some, even in the stories I read, the initial past stories, if you will, that came out yesterday, the way that the anti-dumping provisions were described were different. So I would love to be able to give people the clarity they want on that if it exists. But.
Okay.
And the only thing I'd add on that as well is that this is evolving sometimes on an hourly basis. There's three goals here. The first is the ongoing negotiations of the response to the US tariffs. The second is stopping those cheap foreign imports of steel. and that's also evolving. And the third is the, you know, the Buy Canadian, the One Canadian economy. But my understanding from discussions with the ministers is that what was announced is intended to be the starting point, and we're expecting that those provisions will evolve as, you know, as we respond further and as those high level negotiations continue.
And that's why it's so important that we have these meetings with all of the industry stakeholders in Hamilton, and we get their feedback as soon as there's an announcement so that we can fine tune and refine. And that's exactly how it's supposed to work.
Oh, and forgive me, there's a new task force, right, for steel?
I was going to mention that was the reigning winner among all of the stakeholders that we heard from today. Everyone is highly anticipating this task force, thinks it's an excellent idea. Really, the only lingering question is how quickly can we get it moving, because it is urgent times.
So are you folks hoping to, or expecting to be part of that that task force, or is it, what is the, do we know the composition yet?
I can't answer that now.
But that is separate from the bipartisan steel caucus?
Oh yes, completely different.
Thank you, folks.
Okay, can I ask you just once more? I know we've gone over this. The steel producers, the steel companies, what was their reaction to the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday? Did they think that was too much, not enough? There's some other direction he should be going in?
We got a lot of really specific feedback on a lot of different details of what was announced yesterday. Some of it they really appreciated, and in other cases they had excellent ideas of how we can improve what we've already announced. So as JP said, it's an initial step. We've got more to do, and that's why we're meeting with everybody in the industry to make sure that we have exactly the right approach to maximize our support of our industry and the workers in our steel industry.
I'd say the overarching message from everybody was that steel production, steel manufacturing in Canada is not sustainable with an ongoing 50% tariff, and the urgency for immediate action. And that was heard loud and clear.
So JP, when you say not sustainable, these companies talking about closing down?
At a 50% tariff, there is not a market sustainable option to continue steel making in Canada, and that's the reality. You know, just using ArcelorMittal Dofasco as an example, they invested billions of dollars in Hamilton. They're not going anywhere. But with that it takes time to transition to new markets, to, you know, change your production. And in the short term, like, this is a very real crisis.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks
everybody.
everybody. Really appreciate everybody.
So Greg, while you're here, I'll just ask you what JP was just saying there. With the concerns that the steel industry is having, what would that do to Hamilton? What would that do to business in Hamilton if these companies start shutting down or whatever?
Yeah, Al, I prefer not to think about that on a Friday morning. But listen, I think you know, I think it's why conversations like this are so important, because getting that voice, our voices heard, our community heard, and you know, the impacts would ripple to impacts to you know, you just continue to work through our economy, right? We're the importance of shop Canadian and shop local has not changed since this all started in January. In fact, it continues to be of the utmost importance to ensuring the financial viability of our communities. I continue to say, and I don't have an exact number, but we know from the Canadian Chambers, when it was a holistic tariff, we were the 8th most impacted community in Canada. When you look at these steel and aluminum tariffs, I would be shocked if we're not in the top 2 or 3 communities impacted by the trade war. And so ensuring that Hamilton's voice is heard, not just at the federal level, but at all levels of government is imperative. And we appreciate JP and Lisa joining us here today to make sure that that message is being amplified at the highest levels.
And just one thing I'd add on that just real quick, because I think from the Prime Minister, the ministers understand that steelwood making, Hamilton is the heart of steel making in Canada. We are by far the largest steel producers. We have the most jobs, the biggest impact, but it's a national importance. The steel industry for Canada is an issue of national significance in terms of our national sovereignty, in terms of our national economy. So we're focused on the local impacts for sure, but we're also focused on the broad picture national interest that this is having for our country.
Yeah. And I appreciate that sentiment, JP. I'll just add from the Chamber's perspective. Listen, there's a reason we're playing the national anthem at all our events right now, right? This is about Canada as a whole. So, well, friends, I've got a board committee meeting in 3 minutes, which is going to go fantastic based on how the morning has gone. So I'm going to try and wing that as to the best of my ability. But I appreciate everybody's time and energy. JP and Lisa, again, just thank you very much for your time and energy this morning throughout. And Matt, now, if you guys need anything from us, just poke us a